So, Professor, let's just ask again a very fundamental question. Um, yeah, this essay you shared with me, which was excellent. Thank you for sharing that. This we already discussed this notion of the ontotaxonomy. However, I'll just ask you this: in your opinion, in your view, is Kant the enemy of metaphysics?
No, I think we have to focus on the positive in Kant. And ironically, that positive is the part that everyone wants to forget, namely the thing in itself. It's the strangest thing that Kant, undoubtedly the most influential philosopher since Plato and Aristotle, launched his revolution with the notion of the thing in itself. And yet the thing in itself has itself come to be interpreted as a form of dogmatism. I get a lot of critiques of my philosophy that are essentially, critiques of the thing in itself. People forget that no, the thing in itself is what prevents dogmatic metaphysics from working.
He was
The
trying to
fact that,
save metaphysics, right? From
yeah,
dogma. Yeah.
yeah, and it's not possible in its dogmatic form. And but the way you stop dogma is with the thing in itself. The thing in itself is not a piece of dogma. That's a German idealist addition. This idea that the things in themselves are themselves contradictory and therefore a residual piece of dogmatism. No, the finitude of cognition is Kant's central breakthrough, and that is it's the thing in itself that allows him to do that. Now, the mistake that's made is that people also, and not just people, Kant himself did this, people attach that too readily to the other part of the Kantian package, which is that therefore the proper role of philosophy is simply to critique the transcendental conditions of access to reality. Because we are humans, and therefore we only have access in human experience to human stuff. We do not have access to what goes on in nature, and therefore we cannot talk about it. That would be dogmatism. But there's an equivocation here, I think. Dogmatism means trying to talk about a thing as though we had direct access to its properties, as though the thing were directly present before us and could be exhaustively described. It's not dogmatism if you talk about something that's not you, as long as you're aware that it too is something you can't talk about in terms of all of its properties exhaustively. So the critique of dogmatism means that I cannot prove using reason that God exists for Kant. It doesn't mean that I can't talk about what would happen if what happens metaphysically when two dinosaurs are fighting, or when fire burns cotton, the famous Islamic example from the Middle Ages. And there's an odd tendency to make a Kantian flavored response that you can't talk about fire burning cotton because that's outside of human experience. You'd be dogmatic if you're talking about it. No, you wouldn't. You can talk about fire burning cotton just as readily as you can talk about your own minds, because as mentioned in our reflections on psychoanalysis, we don't have any more direct access to our own
Correct.
mind than we do to
Yeah.
fire burning
Not conscious.
cotton.
Yeah.
So those are on the same level. Those are on the same level. They are both equally valid topics of philosophy: causation, introspection. Introspection is not any more readily accessible to us than physical causation. Okay, now the second defense mechanism kicks in here, and people say, yeah, but science already does that. And you're going to tell science what to do when it comes to fire? You're going to end up with a crazy metaphysics of nature like Schelling. Aren't we past that? Ha ha ha. Okay, but again, that assumes that the natural sciences are telling us everything we need or can know about inanimate objects, because yes, it's the best we can do when it comes to mathematized spatiotemporal descriptions of how certain physical things interact when they come together. But that's not the only thing going on when two objects interact, because as mentioned, objects contain subcomponents, they are emergent in some way, interactions take place at all of those levels, and boiling them all down to the language of physics isn't necessarily going to get you all of those. In fact, we know it isn't. We know it isn't. And then another defense mechanism that kicks in is people say, okay, then tell me how object-oriented ontology is going to help physics, which again begs the question. It's saying that unless something cashes out in the results of physics, it's worthless when it comes to inanimate nature. So the answer is possibly object-oriented ontology will contribute nothing to physics. Another possible answer is that in 40 years, it's very relevant for physics. That some of the concepts of ontology could be picked up by physics, just like some of Kant's and Leibniz's and Mach's were by physicists. Physicists have always known this, at least until the Anglophone kind of anti-intellectual scientists of the post-war era. The Feynman is sometimes accused of this, and Hawking deserves a bit of it. Whereas the continental European physicists always had a bit more of a reflective, theoretical side. You've got Bohr reading Kierkegaard and Einstein reading all kinds of stuff from the history of philosophy. So we shouldn't be intimidated by the anti-philosophy attitudes of the Feynmans and the Hawkings. And even in Feynman's case, it isn't that clear. There is a lot of stuff out there that physics is not the right medium to discuss. And this is very clear in the case of aesthetics. I've mentioned it in the case of law. And so we can celebrate the greatness of physics. Modern physics is certainly one of the greatest human achievements of all time, the things that it's opened up and also the perils it's opened up. But that does not mean we should all bow down and say, "How may I serve thee, master?" which is unfortunately how many analytic philosophers behave towards the sciences. So that's the first thing that needs to happen is people need to accept that there are many discourses about the world that are fruitful, that are not necessarily scientific discourses in the usual sense. Okay, that's the first thing. The other thing, of course, they have to accept is that we do not have direct introspective knowledge. That's more of a statement aimed at the transcendental idealists, philosopher types. They ought to study a little more psychoanalysis and see how opaque our introspection really is and how mediated it is. And then we're going to see that the two poles of the Kantian division of labor don't necessarily work that well. And in a sense, Triple O is a Kantianism. It's just a Kantianism that isn't just about the human subject. It's one in which finitude and the thing in itself also infiltrates inanimate interactions. And that's, I think, what's new about Triple O in the philosophical story. You have Whitehead placing, again, all causal relations on the same footing as perceptual immediacy, but Whitehead's a thorough relationist in his ontology. So he thinks the objects are nothing more than their relations, whereas Triple O is saying the opposite, that there's a surplus in these relations and that these relations are just as tragically doomed as the human romantic's failure to grasp the meaning of a ruined temple. The same thing happens at the inanimate level.
Yeah.
So, but
No, I mean, I just want to add here, you put it succinctly in that essay. You've said here, it's for the listener really. The only way to escape this assumption, the only exit from modern philosophy, is to cease conceiving of the thing in itself as something unknowable to humans and to reconceive it as the excess in things beyond any of their relations to each other.
right.
I thought that was beautifully put.
Thanks. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Oh, you gotta thank your past self for that.
Right.
Yeah, so
That's the best experience in reading your own work, by the way. Going back through and reading a claim in one of your past writings and saying, yeah, but now someone could say this, and then you answer it in the next paragraph.
correct.
So
That's a great feeling. I can
it
imagine.
is. Yep.
I, I've got to admit, I'm yet to fully experience that because I'm an idiot.
Oh,
So,
no,
so,
you're not.
so, Professor, one more question. Okay, before we continue, I've got to ask. I'm so sorry, we've gone over time. Is it okay? Are you feeling all right? Or
I am.
yeah, I promise maybe another 15, 20 minutes tops. I apologize.
As
I
long
should
as
have.
we don't miss Merleau-Ponty and Schelling.
Oh yeah, yeah. As I told you, absolutely. I've got a whole bit of an excerpt on that I want to read out before we get to that. That's very important.
Okay.
So yeah, the question of appearance, right? I mean, I I remember reading about this a while back when I was reading Triple O. So the book on Triple O. Now, of course, Hegelians also reject the thing in itself, and they even kind of, for them, the essence is split in itself. That's why they appear and so on. But I'm curious, in object-oriented ontology, you too reject the thing in itself, or do you reconceive it as as per this excerpt that I read?
I accept the thing in itself because there is not a commensurability between the thing and any causal effect of the thing. So, in other words, a thing and the version of that thing that anything interacts with are not going to be identical. When a fire burns a cotton ball, obviously countless features of that cotton ball are completely irrelevant to the fire's interaction with it. And yet those qualities are to some extent part of the cotton. It's just that no entity is equipped to interact with all of the qualities of another entity. And this is also incidentally why I reject the concept of matter. I think the entire reason the concept of matter exists in the history of philosophy is to provide an alibi for how one thing can move into another without changing. But
Yeah.
specifically, in classical model of knowledge, supposedly when I know a horse, the form of the horse comes into my mind, though the matter of the horse obviously does not, or else I'd have a giant horse in my head. Okay, but what if there is no such substratum called matter that's able to hold this horse form in it, so that the only difference between the horse in reality and the horse in my mind is that one is in matter and the other is not? No one's ever seen this matter. All we've ever seen are forms. All we've ever detected are forms. We've never detected formless matter. And I think a better model of knowledge is that the form is transferred. It's like transmitting communications down the line. There's going to be some noise, some distortion, some signal loss. And this is how knowledge works as well. It might not all be loss. It might also be enhancements. It might be that humans are able to see more in a thing than is actually there, for instance. But knowledge is a form of translation. This is why I consider humans the translating animals rather than the critical animals. We're able to bring vastly different things together into the same medium. And obviously, economics is one of the more controversial manifestations of this. You put a price on everything. That's the most extreme example of bringing all heterogeneous things together under one yoke. But that's an essential tendency in human beings. We might need to control it in certain ways, but that's who we are. That's what we do. We put things under a single yoke. We believe in more, we link more. So there's grounds for a new anthropology here, a new philosophical anthropology.
Yes, I've got another good quote for this from you here. You say, Triple O holds with Latour that there is no transport without transformation. A
Right.
form does not move, whether from the thing to the mind or any other manner, without undergoing some sort of translation. In this age, and you end rather provocatively, you say, in this age of resurgent materialism, we need less materialism and more formalism.
Right.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's deliberate provocation.
Yeah, it's a good provocation. And